Jocko has taken his experience as a Navy SEAL officer and brought it to the world at large. He spent 20 years as part of U.S. Navy SEAL teams. He was commander of SEAL Team 3's Task Unit Bruiser during the Battle of Ramadi. He orchestrated SEAL operations that helped the Ready 1st Brigade of the U.S. Army's 1st Armored Division bring stability to the city of Ramadi. Jocko returned from Iraq to serve as officer in charge of training for all West Coast SEAL teams, and there he spearheaded the development and leadership training, personally instructing and mentoring the next generation of SEAL leaders that have continued to perform with great success and bravery on the battlefield. He now has translated his leadership lessons into his company, Echelon Front, where he's a leadership instructor, speaker, and executive coach. He is also the author of the mega bestseller, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, and he hosts the very popular Jocko Podcast. It is one of the most listened to, fastest growing podcasts for leaders of all stripes, including civilians like you and me. Everyone, bring him out. Give a round of applause. Let's welcome a hero, Jacko Willink. All right, Jocko. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me out. Appreciate it.
Our theme for the discussion today is one of the guiding tenets of your life. It happens to be the name of your new book out October 17th, Discipline Equals Freedom, a field guide. So discipline equals freedom. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think the freedom part is pretty easy for everyone to understand. I think that everybody wants freedom in all the various aspects of their life, whether it's financial freedom. Those are the two examples I bring up all the time are financial freedom. Of course, everyone wants financial freedom. Everyone wants to have more free time. Those are two really easy examples to understand. And if you want to have financial freedom, well, then how are you going to get there? The answer is you have to have financial discipline. And same thing with more free time. If you want to have more free time, then you have to have a more disciplined time management schedule. And you have to have discipline in your life to say no to the things that aren't actually moving you towards whatever goals you have.
What drove you to enlist in the SEALs as a teenager?
You know, I was one of those kids that I was running around the woods, taking every stick I could find and pretending it was a machine gun. And at some point, you know, probably around the age of 7 or 8, I realized that you could actually go and have a job where they'd give you a real machine gun. And I said to myself, I can get paid for this. So eventually I figured out what the SEAL teams were. I liked being in the water. And the SEAL teams were obviously the maritime component of special operations, and so it seemed like the place to go, and that's where I ended up.
It's a major commitment for anyone, but as an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, and this is when people make this commitment, do they have any idea what's really in store for them? Did you?
I honestly thought I would be dead in 5 years once I got in there. That's literally what I thought. I thought SEALs were just all over the world fighting in all these wars, and I was going to go and do that too, and I was ready to rock and roll.
So you've told me before that one of your favorite things about being a SEAL was the training, when you were going through it yourself, and the physical and tactical work that goes into becoming a SEAL. What was it that you loved about that so much?
Well, you know, a lot of times when people think of the training in the SEAL teams, they think of the training that you see on TV, which is, you know, the guys carrying the boats on their head and carrying the logs around, and that's what a lot of people talk about. But that actually is just the beginning of your career. And when you're in the SEAL teams, no one actually talks about that, and no one actually cares, because all of us have been through it. And you don't actually learn anything about being a SEAL in that initial phase of training. And so, yeah, you go through that training, a bunch of people quit, that's cool. But what I really liked about it was the tactics of when you're actually a commando and you're maneuvering elements on the battlefield and you're closing with and destroying the enemy, or you're training to be able to do that. That's a fantastic job. It's fun, it changes all the time, it's dynamic, And yeah, it's really hard to find a replacement for that in the civilian sector.
You learned a lot of these guiding principles that have shaped your life ever since as an 18 or 19-year-old. Did you need them after your upbringing, your teenage years? Were you reckless or unruly? Did you need the discipline?
Yes, one could say I was fairly unruly as a kid. Yeah, I was a little bit of a maniac of a kid. And that's one thing that was great about the military for me was it's a clean slate, number one, and then they give you very specific, okay, this is what you need to do to succeed. And so you show up a SEAL team and they say, you got to learn about this radio, and here's what you need to know about it. And if you know that, you're going to be successful in that department. And here's what you got to know about this weapon. And if you learn that, then you'll be successful. And that's a great base to start from. And then eventually, what you really learn in the SEAL teams is that what you have to do is you have to be able to think. You have to be able to problem solve. And you have to be able to look at complex problems, simplify them, and then implement solutions to them. And that's what comes a little later once you have that base. But it's a little bit different from what people think, because a lot of times people think that the military everything is super rigid and structured, and that all you're doing is getting orders from above you in the chain of command and you're executing those orders. Well, that's actually not true at all. And what you're really doing in the military is you're looking at complex problems on the battlefield, and you're coming up with a solution with your team on how to get those problems solved. And that's why I think that part of the military, even though it's not well known, it does translate great into the civilian sector, because this is what business people, and now obviously I work with businesses all the time, and that's what the businesses are doing. They're looking at these problems that they have in whatever industry they're in, and they're trying to find out solutions so they can execute them quickly and efficiently. You definitely have to be humble. And when you show up in the SEAL teams, and when I showed up in the SEAL teams as a new guy, like I said, even though I'd been through this tough training, you better be humble when you show up at the SEAL teams, because you don't know anything. And if you think you know something, you find out really quickly that you don't. And so it's actually easy, because if you're humble and you have an open mind and you're willing to listen, the guys are willing to teach you. And it's fundamental things that you can learn pretty quickly. But anybody that comes in that's arrogant, that thinks they know everything, they're going to have problems. And again, that's the same thing you see in the business world. When we work with companies where the company that is actually asking us to come in, and maybe the CEO is saying, hey, we want you to come and help us, that company, they're already doing well. They're already being successful. And their attitude is, hey, we need help. We want to get better. We want to be more successful. And those companies, they ramp up really quickly, and we have a great time working with them. Sometimes we work with companies where, let's say, we get brought in by the board, brings us in because the company's not doing well. Well, right off the bat, the company's not doing well, and they don't think they need any help. And so it's the opposite effect. They're saying, well, we don't need any help. We don't need you guys here. And the fact of the matter is they need us more than the other folks do. But the reason that they need help is the reason we're there in the first place. It's the reason they're not doing well, because they're not looking at themselves every day humbly and saying, what can we do better? How can we improve? How can we adjust right now and turn our game around or improve our game so that we can get better in the market?
You've written before, and I know talked about on your podcast, just humility as a vital trait of any leader. In the SEALs, if you're not humble, it could get you and your team killed. How does that work exactly? Is it about closing yourself off from ideas from other people?
That's definitely one of them. If you and I are working together and I'm the boss and I have a big ego and I think I'm better than you and you come to me with an idea, I immediately shut you out. Well, what if your plan was a better plan? Or what if you had some piece of knowledge that made sense for a particular operation, but my ego is too big to listen to you? Well, now we go out and we put lives at risk and possibly lose lives because my ego is too big. Same thing you could say about the enemy, right? If I don't think the enemy is any good, all the enemy's no good, they don't train hard, and they're not prepared for the big tough SEALs. Well, if you have that attitude, guess what? Maybe those guys are training harder. And if you start cutting corners in your training, you're going to get caught. And obviously, it's the same thing in the business world. When a company's doing well, if the company stays humble while they're doing well, they're still looking for how they can improve. They're still looking for things that they can do better. And they will stay on top. But the minute a company says, that's right, we're the best, and no one else even stands a chance, well, guess what? Those people down there on the bottom, they're hungry, and they're going to come and get them.
So you didn't start out as a leader. You worked your way up through the ranks, and you learned from people and experiences. Who or what shaped you?
Well, I was really lucky. Again, it's a great environment to grow up in. You know, from a kid, basically, seeing and being in SEAL platoons with varied types of leadership. And I was very lucky that I saw really outstanding leaders, and I saw some leaders that weren't outstanding at all, far from it.
And you can learn from both.
And I learned from both, you know, and even as a young kid, I wouldn't put it together 100%, but I'd say, man, that guy does something that makes us all want to do a good job for him. I want to act like that guy. And this guy over here, he makes us all mad, and we don't even want to come to work and work for him. I'm not going to act like him. And eventually, I kind of figured out what those traits were that they had, and actually humility being one of the most important ones that I noticed with the people we wanted to work for and I wanted to do a good job for. Those guys are the most humble people. And ironically, always the most experienced, too. So the most experienced people would be the most humble, and the least experienced people would be the least humble, and be the most imposing of how they wanted to do things, which is not a good way to lead.